Dear friends, in this presentation I would like to present you Leo Vygotsky, the founder of the social development theory and the so-called social constructivist. But why Leo Vygotsky? First of all, I am really proud that the person from my country and of my nationality contributed so much to the development of the modern pedagogical approaches and was a kind of proclaimer of the key concepts for education for sustainable development and holistic learning, as I refer to below. Leo Vygotsky was born in 1896 in a small Belarusian town Orsha. He started his professional career as a public school teacher, literary critic, and psychologist in Gomel. In the early 1920s, he established at Gomel Pedagogical College his first laboratory on experimental psychology on childhood and special education. Together with his colleagues, Vygotsky researched the relationship between the child's development and its learning abilities, provided further and refresher trainings for teachers from Gomel gubernia. The accumulated materials were presented later in his famous books Pedagogical Psychology and Psychology of Art, which marked his main scientific interests in art and pedagogy. In 1924, Vygotsky was invited after a series of lectures at Second Neuropsychological Congress in Leningrad as a research assistant to the Institute of Experimental Psychology at Moscow State University. In the same year, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and just within 10 years of his brilliant but brief academic career, he managed to receive several professorships and wrote numerous articles and books on educational psychology. In the same year, the so-called Vygotsky Circle, the group of fellow thinkers from Moscow, Leningrad, Kharkiv, Germany and USA, was established. In 1925, for the first and last time in his career, he himself presented his ideas at the International Conference in London. Later on, due to his disease, his works were presented in absentia by his fellows at conventions in Yale University, Berlin, Barcelona, and other cities. In 1934, Vygotsky died and left unpublished and unfinished a huge pedagogical legacy which was fully accepted only decades later. Among the most famous books, first of all should be mentioned The Psychology of Art, Educational Psychology, Historical Meaning of the Crisis in Psychology, The Mind in Society, his major work Thinking and Speech. But for us, as educators on humanitarian principles and values, the most important is Educational Psychology, which contains lots of ideas and implications adopted and developed later on within a holistic approach. Vygotsky's works influenced the development of the social constructivist theory and contributed to the broader understanding of social interaction in the person's development. So let's look closer to the main ideas of this thinker and their relevance for education in humanitarian principles and values. What Vygotsky thought about the learning-teaching process. Unlike the previous behaviorist theories, Vygotsky stated that cognitive development stems from social, cultural relationships and not vice versa. So, every function in the child's cultural development appears twice. First, on the social level and later on the individual level. First, between people in the interpsychological, and then inside the child, intrapsychological. wrote Vygotsky in his work Mind in Society. Now, this idea doesn't seem very revolutionary, but by that time, Vygotsky and his fellows needed to create an alternative to the pure behaviorist theories, where a learner was considered as an object of teaching. This attitude is still very popular nowadays, even by progressive and innovative teachers, because most of them didn't see the main application from the primacy of the social in Vygotsky's theory. To learn means to build new behavioral reactions. To be learned and retained, the new knowledge should pass through the personal experience of the learner. And the personal experience inevitably roots in the social interactions. Hence the conclusion: it is impossible to educate someone else. It's not a teacher who educates, but a social learning environment. The proper learning environment is the real object of teaching, and the object of learning at the same time, states Vygotsky in the same work. He also had some ideas about the role of the teacher. He said that we should reconsider the role of the teacher, having in mind that a person is educating by him or herself. The role of the teacher is nevertheless very important. Vygotsky states that the teaching profession, like any other job, has two sides. A technical one, like a book or a map. Teacher is a part of the school process of knowledge transfer, and an organizational, managerial one, to govern and to guide the process of learning what no learning tool is capable for. So teacher is like tracks, while learners are carriages, following the directed way, stated Vygotsky in Educational Psychology. So according to him, the educational process is threefold active: teacher, learner, and the environment as a vital medium are presented here, and they shape each other in a feedback loop. To teach how to think rather than just transfer knowledge, said Vygotsky. Well thought out challenges in education environment empower a learner and let him or her go forward in their cognitive development. But the main question, how to organize this learning environment, is of high relevance both in 1920s and now. In Vygotsky's works, he addresses critics to the school in the beginning of the 20th century, which is absolutely applicable to the modern schools as well, and develops his ideas about the zone of proximal development. Vygotsky defines the zone of proximal development as the distance between the actual developmental level as determined by independent problem solving and the level of potential development as determined through problem solving under adult guidance or in collaboration with more capable peers. Hence, the main teaching objective is to create the zone of proximal development as the most effective tool for development of three learning domains, and affective one, behavioral one, and cognitive one. And this is possible only within a social interactive learning environment. Also, Vygotsky had some very interesting thoughts on motivation. First of all, he states that neither punishment nor award motivate students for learning. They replace the real learning objectives with the fake ones, contribute merely to the slave mentality and not to the mentality of a free person. Then he asserts some ideas about motivation, which nowadays can be found in the foundations of the most innovative pedagogical approaches. So, the new knowledge should be linked to the previous background knowledge of the learner, to his or her personal interests. It should be embedded in practical actions, so to be practice-oriented, and linked to the emotional level as well. Also, the new knowledge should be related in an interdisciplinary way to the other fields of knowledge, states Vygotsky in Educational Psychology. While studying Vygotsky's work, I couldn't get rid of thoughts why these ideas, which sound innovative even today, haven't been requested and set into implementation decades ago. Just because his concepts on the role of teacher and mutual relationships in the educational process are so close to the holistic approach, and the principles for achieving learning objectives, practice orientation, interdisciplinarity, considering on three domains of learning, they resonate so much with the priority areas of education for sustainable development and education for humanitarian principles and values as an essential part of it. Hardly could I find any other education researcher from Belarus or Russia whose heritage would be more applicable to education for humanitarian principles and values. The ideas on motivation raising get easily integrated with awareness raising stage. The concept of shared learning environment stays very close to the safe place notion needed for opinion building. The whole Project Humanity course, and in particular action orientation stage, proceed in my opinion in the zone of proximal development and empower learners and teachers to learn from each other and to deal with challenges never encountered before. I just regret to say that nowadays Vygotsky's work is more accepted, explored and integrated into the educational system abroad than in Russia and Belarus. Surely, conferences and seminars are annually organized in Minsk and Gomel and in Moscow and Petersburg on the current issues of Vygotsky's legacy. Yes, there are a couple of pages in the books of history of pedagogics about him, but the pre-service and in-service teachers are not able to use his ideas, just because they have to do with the prescribed and inflexible state educational programs, which have no place for cooperative learning, and oversized classrooms as well, 30-35 children, which makes impossible a tailored application of zone of proximal development for each child. But nevertheless, Vygotsky's ideas are very vital in the non-formal education, and where it's possible that trainers and educators use guided learning and discussion-based methods. Now, I would like to say some words about the advantages and disadvantages of this theory. Some literary critics say that the concept of zone of proximal development can also be adapted to teacher education and to the other fields of learning, which I consider a very good follow-up of Vygotsky's work. The others argue that he laid the foundations of dialogic pedagogy as a requisite component of effective teaching. In my opinion, Vygotsky put an emphasis on guiding and collaborative role of teacher, shifted focus of the teaching efforts from the learner to the learning environment, and with zone of proximal development concept opened new possibilities for revealing learners' capacities. From the disadvantages can be mentioned that Vygotsky's work is full of half-developed ideas, and they shouldn't be taken unquestioningly by contemporary psychology, but only after proper consideration. Also, some critics say that he attached the greatest importance to the content of educational curricula, but placed less emphasis on the structural and instrumental aspects. In my opinion, some disadvantages are that the ideas about guided education and zone of proximal development are too much individualized and not acceptable for big classrooms and for formal education. From the other side, the concept of learning social environment, due to his very brief professional career, are too vague described. So, this page, I would like to invite you to learn from the literature I have used for this presentation and to learn that the photos were used from the archive of the Gomel Pedagogical College named after Leo Vygotsky, which I visited this year in February 2019. Thank you for your attention.